Very good. Raspberry Kringle. It makes the night even better. Good. So, Eric, and I think we're set to begin recording whenever you're set to go. Very good. Well, good evening, everyone. My name again, Jim Santel. Delighted, honored that you're with us again this evening. As Kristen said, we're finishing up tonight our work through our exploration of the Bill of Rights, and that includes the 9th and 10th Amendments. Aaron, I'm going to have you move to the next slide right away. And in particular, we're going to be chatting about some ways in which those particular amendments have been invoked. I'll give you some examples of those. And then we're going to be chatting through our wonderful guest, who I'll introduce in just a few moments, all about things like responsibilities of public officials. As Kristen just said, the things that they can and cannot do within their assigned areas. We're looking forward to having Sam this evening spend time in discussion with us about the implications of those decisions by our founding fathers to give a lot of rights to states and what that means. And so, Aaron, let's move on to the next slide right away. There they are. There's the 9th and 10th Amendments. I know that you talk about them all the time over breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's the good thing about this is these are two amendments where James Madison decided to be a little bit more clipped in terms of his language as opposed to the 5th Amendment, which we talked about last class. And so that gives me the opportunity tonight to read them aloud to you. The 9th Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution, this very document that again passed by the Constitutional Convention, and then the amendments obviously enacted by the first Congress and by the states. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights, the enumeration, the setting forth of those rights in the Constitution should not be construed and shall not be construed to deny or disparage others that are retained by the people. In other words, we committed all this to paper. Do not think in any way that the rights that you have as citizens, as residents of this nation, are in any way undermined by the fact that the enumeration is here. The 10th Amendment, again, somewhat similar, sometimes referred to as the companion. The powers designated by this Constitution to the United States are not delegated to the United States, nor prohibited expressly, are reserved to the states. And that's where Sam's good words tonight are going to animate that and describe that to us. As you know, all the 10th Amendment, 10 amendments, the first 10, ratified effective December 15th, 1791. I know you celebrate that date at your home as well. And so let's talk a little bit about what those mean with some examples this evening. Aaron, next slide. And so let me talk initially about the ways in which the 9th Amendment has been used. And again, it does come up with some frequency, even in contemporary litigation and discussions about what our Constitution means. This is my selection of one of those that also brings back memories about privacy rights in America. And in particular, this doctrine in Griswold versus Connecticut way back in 1966. Griswold versus Connecticut is the Supreme Court case that began it all when it comes to privacy rights and this notion that is still out there, even though there's at least one, maybe two Supreme Court justices who like nothing more to get rid of the concept of privacy rights in the Constitution. It is still there. And it was in Griswold versus Connecticut that concept was first announced. And that is Ms. Griswold, again, way back in 1964, 65, 1966. She was actually criminally prosecuted by the state of Connecticut, and she was doing the outrageous thing of providing reproductive counseling for women and also their spouses. She set up, again, as you can see there, a Planned Parenthood clinic right there in Connecticut, and that at the time ran afoul of the state law that said you cannot do that kind of thing. And she was actually prosecuted again along with a doctor of hers participating with her in the services that she was providing. Ultimately goes up to the Supreme Court, and she is successful in getting those criminal convictions overturned, and is there that the Supreme Court says for the first time that you have these fundamental personal liberties, and those are so important that the infringement of them will get our strict scrutiny. We're going to look at them very, very carefully. And in many ways, the discussion about that privacy right derives from the 9th Amendment, this notion that you still have rights, and they are not necessarily set forth in the text of the Constitution, but they're rights that are retained by the people. and that is a privacy right in this interest retained by you when it comes to your lives and your livelihoods. As we well know, in the wake of that, it's Griswold versus Connecticut privacy rights that ultimately result in a decision in 1973 by a group of Supreme Court justices who decided a case for involving the right to abortion, and that's Roe versus Wade, and that remained the law of the land for about 49 years or so. And the issue of privacy rights, of course, also has many, many applications, but it's premised ultimately upon the Ninth Amendment. And it's significant to note that, again, the Griswold case is the beginning of that. There's this concept of substantive due process, which we could spend a lot of time on, also announced, again, as a derivation of Ninth Amendment rights. And again, this notion that there are the Ninth Amendment deposits and places in you, this repository in the people of these fundamental, sometimes even called natural rights. You probably have heard Supreme Court justices talk about those from time to time, that even over and above the Constitution and statutory authority, there are things, they sometimes speak in a spiritual way about God giving you natural rights, and even if you strip that away, some things about nature itself that give you rights. And all of that tied up in this notion in the Ninth Amendment that even though founding fathers and members of Congress put in writing what these rights are, you still retain all sorts of other things that are out there. And just because they're not set forth with great enumeration does not mean that they do not exist. And so, again, Griswold versus Connecticut, still good law in our world and in our nation, although once again, there is certainly push in recent times to revisit that. It had to do in particular with the distribution of contraceptives there in Connecticut. Ms. Griswold, again, criminal convictions, believe it or not, for doing what she was doing, overturned by the United States Supreme Court. Erin, next slide. And so a couple more of those when it comes to the 10th Amendment. Again, those powers not delegated to the United States, to the federal government, nor prohibited by the states. And there are a few things we know. For example, immigration issues, those are exclusively federal in nature, are reserved to the states. And again, the 10th Amendment, this place where this notion of states' rights, that's where people look to get that fundamental notion. I've identified a couple of cases, again, 1997. Many of us will recall the Brady Handgun Act. This is in the wake of the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan and the serious injury to Jim Brady at the time. You may recall a lot of legislation passed in the wake of that, including an attempt to address gun violence in America. And among other things, it established this system, which we still have today, where if you go into an FFL, a place where you can properly, legally buy a gun, you have to undergo a background check. And it's the so-called background check loophole that exists when it comes to non-FFL sales and distribution. But the Brady Handgun Violence Act was the one that established this notion that for the purposes of buying a gun, you have to be checked. And it established this basic system that remains to this day. While that was underway, while that system was being established by the federal government for, again, places around the country that were selling guns, while that was happening, these background checks were delegated, if you will, to the local and state jurisdictions to conduct those checks. And the question was, under the 10th Amendment, that is, again, this delegation of rights to the states and things that are delegated and not, in this case called Prince versus United States, as late as 1997, the Supreme Court ruled that the establishment of even that interim database violates the anti-commandeering concept implicit in the 10th Amendment. You're thinking, what does that mean? Well, it again comes up. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court talks about this a lot when it comes to delegations of authority to presidents. The notion is commandeering the states, basically saying the federal government is going to compel the states. We're going to commandeer your resources, your activities, your human resources, your financial resources, and we're going to tell you to do something. And here, the Supreme Court says, by virtue of your commandeering state resources and capacities, by doing this with establishing, again, on an interim basis, while the federal government got its act together to establish this NICS check system, that was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court said just that, made that decision under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. And then, pulled right out of our recent history in this area, nationwide, but certainly in the greater Milwaukee area. We all recall, we've talked about it from time to time, the recent prosecution of Hannah Dugan, and we've talked about this recently. She again recently sentenced by federal district judge Lynn Edelman, and she is going to be appealing that judgment down the road to the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. Well, before that happened, even before she was tried in December of last year, among the various motions that Hannah Dugan, through her attorneys, raised in opposition to the very prosecution of her in a federal court, in the federal courthouse in downtown Milwaukee, she raised a 10th Amendment claim. And she said, wait a minute, I'm a state court judge, and I was presiding over state court proceedings, and under the 10th Amendment, the federal government should not have any involvement in that. The things, the decisions I was making, those should be exclusive to the states, and for that reason, Judge Edelman dismissed the entire case as being in violation of the 10th Amendment, right? And I think an awful lot of us looked at that and said, well, that's creative, and that is interesting and certainly has some merit to it, a non-frivolous argument. In the end, for reasons that Judge Edelman articulated in a lengthy opinion, he said, no, it doesn't prevent the federal government for addressing what it perceives to be, what it has charged as a federal crime, and the fundamental notions behind the 10th Amendment do not apply in this case. And so he denied the motion to dismiss. But it was interesting to note that the 10th Amendment was raised, again, prior to trial by Judge Dugan in that case. You may recall as well other motions filed. Recall the immunities doctrine that she had also invoked, saying that, gee, if the President of the United States of America is immune from certain criminal acts, I and the judiciary should also be immune. Likewise, Judge Edelman made some distinctions between that case from a couple of years ago coming out of the Supreme Court and what was happening in his courtroom, denied that motion as well. And then after the conviction, as you know as well, looked at this Fourth Circuit case involving the description of what was going on at the time that she engaged in the allegedly and the conduct for which she has now been convicted, and said likewise, I'm not going to grant that motion to dismiss. All of those things, and the reason why they're significant is even though the judge has resolved them and said, no, there's no 10th Amendment argument, at least it's not compelling from his perspective, is, as we've talked before, all of these kinds of things can and certainly will be raised by Judge Dugan on appeal. And again, she can raise many, many things involving jury instructions and all sorts of evidentiary rulings. My strong sense is that she will also raise this issue of the 10th Amendment prohibition, which is her position, the 10th Amendment prohibition of the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, reaching into a state institution, the state judiciary, and trying to effectively regulate what a state judge was doing. Again, Lynn Edelman says no, but an appeals court could take a look at that and probably will seriously discuss it. It may or may not be successful, but again, it's probably going to be out there once again. I thought it was interesting, again, I don't have a particular slide on this, but even in preparing for today's program, we have more of that. And again, it is not so much a Ninth Amendment issue, although arguably things retained by the people, but more of a 10th Amendment argument. And you probably saw this, that a number of weeks ago, the U.S. Department of Justice, through its antitrust division, gave its imprimatur of approval to this Paramount deal, right? And I think I may have told you at the time that I was interested, as you all were, in that because of the speed with which it was done by an antitrust division that usually takes months, sometimes years, in determining whether or not the takeover by one company of another is in the public's best interests. And so when the Department of Justice, the institution for which I worked for 30 years, very, very promptly after this was proposed, said, yes, Paramount, go ahead and make that acquisition. And we put our imprimatur on this. There are an awful lot of people who said, well, wait a minute, have you done the full analysis? Well, there are two things we know from the wake of that. One is that the Federal Communications Commission, another branch of the federal government, has yet to put its imprimatur on that. It's an agency that's got to do that. Highly likely given the present leadership of the Federal Communications Commission, that, like the Department of Justice, it will probably fairly summarily grant that. But you're thinking, gee, Jim, why are you raising this once again? Well, it turns out that invoking very, very broadly the rights of states to become involved in this, and attorneys general in particular, who are not federal officers, and they're not beholden to the federal attorney general, or even to the FCC, or even to the President of the United States of America. A coalition of states, as you well know, sued to block this $110 billion media merger, and they were arguing that combining two of these major Hollywood studios here does in fact have a significant impact upon the constituents in their particular states. And although they're not arguing specifically as a states' right issue, the fact that they are bringing this into court is an invocation of this notion that just because the federal government does something under the Constitution and under the executive authority generally does not mean that the states don't have options as well. And sure enough, just earlier today, a federal district court judge, her name is Judge Araceli Martinez Olguin, O-L-G-U-I-N, has issued, yes indeed, a 14-day temporary restraining order, a federal district court, and she has said that she's blocking these companies from closing the deal while she has more hearings and considers the broader antitrust lawsuit brought by these 12 states, including the state of California. And she is plainly saying that regardless of what she may do, again, a preliminary injunction, she has basically said just hours ago, federal government, do not go ahead with this. We've got some states' rights here. We've got state attorneys general who want to ensure that their constituents are considered in all of this process, and presumably she's going to have more hearings on all this. But while that's going on, she said, don't go ahead with this. Why? Because she has got jurisdiction, number one, even as a federal judge, to decide the case brought to her by state officials, state attorneys general, 12 of them, saying that what the federal government has done is not proper, is not legal, and we want you as a federal district court judge basically to acknowledge that our authority as state attorneys general and the authorities that we have, the responsibilities that we have on behalf of our constituents, that should compel you effectively to overturn ultimately, or at least issue an order saying that this merger is not to go ahead. And so it's entirely possible, again, if federal district court judges, as you know, routinely do issue preliminary injunctions to maintain the status quo, because again, if the merger happens, it's kind of late. It's one of those situations where the barnyard animals have left the barn and can't reverse it then, right? And so it's not unusual, but it's also significant that she said, from what I see already, I've got some concerns about this. So it may well be that when thinking about the 10th Amendment, once again, powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states and to the people of those states. That is very, very broadly what's going on right now, as the judge there in California has said, hold up on this, and it may well be that the decision that she makes, again, probably will be appealed then. If she does, in fact, restrain that from going ahead, goes to the Ninth Circuit, could go to the Supreme Court. Perhaps not on the emergency docket. It shouldn't go on that basis, but you never know what the administration, which plainly is proposing this and pushing forward, may do on all of that. And so identify that just as another indication of how the 10th Amendment, as late as this afternoon and today, continues to be vital and very much a part of our lives. Aaron, next slide. And so that brings us to our wonderful guest, and we are delighted and honored to have Sam Liebert with us this evening. I'll do a bit of an introduction to him, and again, I want to thank him so much for being with us. For many years in the past, he was the clerk treasurer in places like Shorewood Hills and Sussex and Monroe. Spent a lot of time doing that, a long-time civil servant. Spent a lot of time in Janesville, 2011, Sam, until 2017, a member of the city council then, and was also the council president at the time that he left. Most recently, again, in addition to other work in the government arena and the political arena, he has been and is as you can see, the Wisconsin State Director of All Voting is Local. Kristen has invited him here to be with us tonight to talk perhaps less about the 9th and 10th Amendments, but how it is that we go from a federal government to a state government, the authorities that exist inside state governments, how we understand that, the powers of state officials and state agencies to do their work. Delighted to introduce at this time Sam Liebert. We're thrilled to have you with us this evening, Sam.
I don't know. I could talk about the 9th and 10th Amendment all night. So, I mean, if y'all want to do that, I'm more than okay with that. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we can go to the next slide. You don't need to look at my mug. That's like 4 or 5 years old too. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here this evening. Tonight isn't about telling you what to think politically. I think this is a pretty engaged crowd, very educated crowd. But my goal is to help you understand really how Wisconsin government actually works. I've worked in local government. I've administered elections. I've served as an elected official on my hometown city council in Janesville. I've worked in city administration, but now I spend my days working with state officials, with legislators, election administration, election officials, and community organizations across Wisconsin. One thing I've learned is that many people know who they vote for, but very few understand what those people can actually do once they get elected. So tonight I'm gonna do my best to pull back the curtain and to talk about how government really works. And then also as well, I know this is being recorded, but I'm also a very interactive guy. I was a high school history teacher for a little bit. So I'm all about participation and being involved in the conversation. So if you have anything, either raise your hand or just jump on in. Happy to talk about that. Yeah, and then, I'll repeat the questions if we have any. Let's see, next slide, I think. So just a little bit about my organization and also who I am. Again, I've been in public service, either in politics or government, for about 20 years. I love it. I originally went to college to be a music teacher. And then when my local high school district was going to cancel its music program, I got involved in grassroots organizing. And then when we successfully saved it, I was like, hey, this was kind of fun. And so another road appeared for me. But I want to talk a bit too about the organization I work for. I'm the Wisconsin State Director for All Voting is Local. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit 501c3. We also do have a 501c4, All Voting is Local Action, but that's really more for lobbying and advocacy. Neither one of our organizations endorses candidates. We don't endorse political parties. We do, though, support policies. We were founded on the assumption that we fight to protect access to the ballot box, especially by protecting historically disenfranchised voters. When I think historically disenfranchised voters, I think of people who look like me, right? My skin is a little bit browner. I think younger people, but I feel like the definition of disenfranchised voters seems to expand every election cycle, right? A lot of laws that have passed recently impact our older voters, our more senior voters. There's also been laws or policies implemented to try to suppress younger voters from accessing the ballot box. And it sort of goes, if you're an hourly wage earner, right? Being able to access the ballot box, or if you're a single parent, right? So the definition is pretty broad. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the core focus areas at All Voting that we focus on. So targeted regional presences. So we're not just in Wisconsin, we're also in, I'm not gonna look at this, I'm gonna see if I got it right. So we're also in Michigan, we're in Pennsylvania, we're in Ohio, we're in Florida, we're in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. I know people tend to say, oh, you're in battleground states. I don't know if I'd consider Ohio and Florida battleground states. I have friends who work in those states, And they say, I don't live in a red state, I live in a rigged state. And so we're trying to unrig those states so that people can have free, fair, and transparent elections again in those states. And I think we're making some progress. Also, we focus, so our sort of bread and butter is policy and advocacy. We fight against strict voter registration rules, combat partisan election interference, and campaigns to lower ballot barriers, again, for those historically disenfranchised folks. And then also, again, through our C4, we do legislative action. So I'm also a Wisconsin lobbyist. So when the legislature is in, I'm in Madison a lot, giving public testimony, meeting with legislators. We do have divided government. We'll talk a bit about that more later. And so, yeah, that's really a lot of what we do. And again, what's inherent in our name, all voting is local. So in Wisconsin, and most of you probably know this, our municipalities are really the ones who run our elections, our municipal clerks, our towns, our villages, and our cities. We have about, and it changes depending on annexations and towns merging, things like that, but we have 1,850, so 1,850, give or take, municipalities. And so essentially on election day and during early vote, we've got 1,850 different elections happening at once. And so we have a very siloed election system. It's very disjointed, but there are obviously some cons with that. The efficiencies are not there. The way that our clerks interpret the law might not be equal across the board. But there's also a lot of election safety in that. The fact that if you were to quote unquote try to rig an election in Wisconsin, you would have to have clerks from multiple municipalities working together. A lot of our processes require both like a Republican and a Democratic poll worker to sign off on certain things on election day at the polling location. So you'd have to have both parties working together. So we have a very good system in Wisconsin. And so I think I always tell people they can be, I don't know how they maybe do things in other states, but in Wisconsin, we have a very safe and secure process run by some really great people who just want to get it right.
Whether other states are similarly as dispersed as Wisconsin is, or less so, that might go to county levels, but it's much larger administration.
So your question is like
Illinois, Iowa.
Sure.
Do they similarly have proportionate number? Like we have 1,800. Do they have a similar large number, or do some do it at say county level where it might only be 90?
Yeah, so the question was sort of what do other states do or how do they run their elections? So my understanding, the state that is most similar to Wisconsin is actually Michigan. Their clerks in their villages, towns, and cities run their elections. Now it does get a little bit different once you go higher up. So Michigan has a Secretary of State who sort of does what our Wisconsin Elections Commission does in Wisconsin, where they, approve the certification of voting equipment and provide legal guidance and ultimately certify statewide elections. That's what the Secretary of State does. Most states, my understanding is like 35 to 40 of them, it's mostly county run. So there's like a top election official at the county, and then they run all the elections throughout that county. And it's a bit more centralized, right? So it's a lot more top down. In Wisconsin, we have 72 counties, and we do have county clerks, and they do play a role in elections. But the county clerks do most of sort of the pre-election work. They're the ones who work with the municipal clerks to order all the ballot styles for that county. The county usually decides which election systems they'll use, right? So you've heard of Dominion voting. There's ES&S. There's a lot of other vendors out there. And then also the county clerks play an important role in certifying the votes. And so in the week or two after the election happens, right, you always see, these are the unofficial numbers. Every county has a board of canvass made up of 3 members, the county clerk, and then a Republican, and then a Democrat. So whether you're Milwaukee County or Menominee County, your commissioners, you only have 3 Board of Canvas commissioners. And so that's also then a political makeup, right? So here in Waukesha, we have a Republican clerk. I assume she's a Republican, our new clerk. And then so our Board of Canvas is 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, where somewhere like Dane County, Scott McDonald's the county clerk, so they have 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. I will say what's really encouraging, I actually just got back from the County Clerks Association in Stevens Point a few weeks ago. Whether the clerks, though, are Republican or Democrat, when I was in that room, I couldn't tell. They had the same concerns and same issues, worried about ICE at the polls, worried about federal intervention, worried about the federal government, firing everyone at the cyber intelligence security agency that protects us from outside influence. So these county clerks, whether because they're partisan positions, they run as Democrats and Republican. Their hearts are in the right place. We haven't seen any issues. I know that's happened in other states like Arizona in 2020 where we had counties refusing to certify, but that hasn't happened in Wisconsin. And so, and again, we have these relationships with these clerks and we're always talking to them, but it's been really promising to see that. Next slide. So local government, right? Government is more than elections. When people hear government, most think about elections, they think about voting. But government touches really nearly every part of our daily lives, right? The roads that you drive on, your drinking water, schools, property taxes, libraries, fire departments, healthcare, environmental protection, business licensing, parks, public safety, right? Government really is everywhere all at once, whether we see it or not. And if you've interacted with your community today, you've probably interacted with government in some way. When I was coming here from Pewaukee, so I'm not too far away. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a lake country guy. I'm not wearing my cargo pants today, but I decided to dress up and put my jeans on. I was doing 49 and a 45, right? And then a Waukesha sheriff got behind me. That was interacting with government. So it's right. It's pervasive. It's everywhere all at once. It never turns off. It's always there. But obviously, there's different levels of government that impact these different areas of policy and things that are important to us. Next slide, please. So, who does what? One of the biggest misconceptions is that every elected official can fix every problem. That's simply not true. The federal government handles things like national defense, immigration, Social Security, currency, right? Those large national things, and I'm sure a lot of that was talked about with the Bill of Rights and the powers enumerated to the federal government. Then we have state government, local government. They handle things like elections, education, Medicaid, criminal law, state highways, state budget. And then we have local government, which is our counties and municipalities, right? So police, fire, parks, libraries, water systems, snow plowing, local roads, elections. I actually always tell people a funny story. My mom's not here today, so I can make fun of her. She's college educated. She worked for the state for 20 plus years. Voted religiously every 4 years. She really wasn't plugged in about midterms, really wasn't plugged in about spring elections where we elect our judges and nonpartisan offices. And the first time she ever voted in an April election was when her son's name was on a ballot. So now we've made a good April voter out of her. She's voted every April since 2011. But I think understanding which levels of government are responsible is really the first step in making change. So we'll take the next slide here. So Wisconsin, much like at the federal level, has 3 separate but equal branches of government. We've got the legislature, we have the governor, and we have the judiciary. Tonight we'll be talking primarily about the governor and the legislature and how they interact with each other, with the public, how we interact with them. But one important point is the governor is not the boss of the legislature. I know he'd like to think he is, but he is not. And on the flip side, the legislature isn't the boss of the governor, although I think Speaker Voss thinks he is. They're designed to check one another, right? They're supposed to be there to check each other's powers, to check each other. Sometimes this makes government slower, but it also prevents one person or one party from having all the power. And similar to the federal government, right, we have a judiciary, we've got our county judges, our courts of appeal, and then ultimately you can work all the way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And then also in here, I did put state agencies as part of sort of this triangle, more on the executive side, sort of pushing the legislature aside. State agencies, especially at the federal level, but also at the state level, have a lot of power. These are mostly career employees who are in these different agencies and departments across the state, and they are the ones, once a law has been passed, they're then interpreting, okay, they wrote this, now what does it actually mean, right? They're the ones who have to enforce the law that was passed. We talked about checks and balances, representing the people. All three branches exist to serve Wisconsinites in our communities. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but they are there. They represent us. We vote for them. And even if an agency has an appointed administrator, ultimately they're usually appointed by an elected official. And then working together, when these branches collaborate, we move forward. Wisconsin has had, in recent memory, in the last generation, we've had one party, one rule, one party rule law, right? We had Governor Walker and the Republican Party control all branches of government. In the past 8 years, we've had divided government. We've had a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor. And then we've also had our Supreme Court go from mostly conservative to now a majority, most would consider liberal philosophy for ruling. And so, again, with my organization, we don't support candidates, we don't support parties, but I think what we're seeing is sort of the unrigging of our system. For the longest time in Wisconsin, right, we've sort of just had, whatever the governor says, the legislature does. They don't do their job on checking power. They don't do their job representing people. They did work together, but they didn't ask questions, right? They didn't do the first couple parts of their job. Yes, sir.
Talking about unrigging, do you have any comments about gerrymandering?
Man, I wrote my master thesis on gerrymandering for my capstone at UWM. So I will say, Wisconsin, after the 2010 elections, the Tea Party wave, right, Walker and the Republicans came to power, and I'm here in a nonpartisan fashion, but I think what I'm going to say is pretty all empirically and factually true. It was after the census, they had complete control of government, and then they rewrote the maps and made them incredibly unbalanced and not truly representative. I don't have all the data in front of me right now, but I mean, literally, the math was shown that Republicans could get I think it was 36.5% of the statewide vote for legislative seats and still have a one-seat majority in both houses, where Democrats would have to get 80% of the statewide vote to get a one-seat majority in both legislatures, bodies of the legislature. So there's that huge imbalance there. There's also a report that was done that showed Wisconsin was essentially a third world democracy. I mean, we were down there with these sort of African tin pot dictatorships as far as the power of one person, one vote, and how it impacts the people that we elect to make decisions for us. So most of you probably all know this. We got some new maps within the last year or two. 2024 was sort of the first part of that cycle, and now 2026 will be completing that out. That's because the Assembly, we've got 99 members. They're elected every 2 years, so they're a bit more responsive to sort of the moment of the voters. And then our state Senate, we've got 33 senators. They're up every 4 years, and so the first class of the 33 went through, so half of the Senate was elected or re-elected 2 years ago, and now the second half will change. And this is just an example, here in Waukesha County. I mean, Waukesha County, under the old maps, I think was completely Republican for a long time, I think up until really like Sarah Rodriguez picked up that seat that was in Waukesha. But now with the new maps, I live in the 5th Senate District, which is based in Tosa and comes all the way out to Pewaukee. And 2 of the 3 state reps there are Democrats now. And so the consensus is that a lot of people think that that district is going to flip. I'm trying to think who my incumbent senator is right now. No, Nalen's my rep and my neighbor. He's the one who just won like a lawsuit for like $1 billion because like a Chinese dehumidifier like burned his house down or something, and the next day he announced he was retiring from the Senate. I guess that $55,000 a year paycheck isn't all it's cracked up to be. So this is sort of the breakdown of our government, right? It's very similar to the federal government. It's modeled very much after the way the U.S. Constitution works at the state level. Next slide. So myth versus reality. So let's test a few campaign promises. So imagine someone saying, I'll lower everyone's utility bills. Can they? Maybe, but not alone. But it would require legislation or action, right? So in Wisconsin, our utilities are regulated by the Public Services Utility Commission, whatever it's called, and the governor appoints people to those. So, we're sort of seeing this at the federal level, right, where the president is appointing people to the FCC, to different commissions that are historically independent or supposed to be independent of politics, and they're making very political decisions. And so we've also seen that at the state level, whether it's Wisconsin or other states. If a candidate says, I'll eliminate property taxes, okay, maybe, but again, that would require legislation. I'll provide universal health care. Well, that would almost certainly require both legislative action and significant funding. So the question voters should always ask isn't, do I like this idea? The better question is, can this office actually accomplish what this person is saying that they'll do? I think there's a lot of us who think the governor can just sort of wave their hand and do something. Obviously, again, at the federal level, you have executive orders. In Wisconsin, we have similar things where the governor, the executive can direct their agencies maybe to use funds a certain way or not to do something. So example, this past week, it wasn't something that was done legislatively, but Governor Evers put out a new executive order to all of his agencies that said pretty much going forward, any fleet state vehicles that your agency buys, they either have to be fully electric or hybrid, right? I think that's a policy most of us like, but if Congressman Tiffany becomes Governor Tiffany, I can probably let you know which one of this governor's executive orders will be one of the first to go, right? And so that's the thing with executive orders or sort of these executive directives are, depending on who the governor is, they can change from term to term. Next slide, please. So let's make a law. Let's walk through sort of a fictional proposal. So imagine we want every public school in Wisconsin to receive upgraded drinking fountains or bubblers, I guess, depending on your side of that coin. Sounds simple, right? Could the governor simply order that tomorrow? No. So here's what would have to happen. Someone would have to draft a bill. The bill would have to be introduced. It would have to go through committee. Then there would be public hearings. Then experts would testify. That's me, I'm an expert. Actually, my organization was mentioned on John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, and we were giving testimony down in Georgia when they were trying to do some shenanigans down there. And it cut back to John Oliver saying, even these election experts, believe X, Y, Z. And so ever since then, I've said, well, John Oliver called me an election expert, so I'll take it. So the experts testify, citizens testify. That's the beauty of lawmaking in our democracy, right? Whether you're an expert and you eat, sleep, and live for election policy like I do, or you watched Fox News one night for 15 minutes and you're an expert now too, right? Everyone can come and testify. And then organizations also weigh in, right? So you might, maybe it's something to do with health, in this fictional law, right? So maybe water experts, environmental experts are going to come and testify either for or against. And then if approved out of committee, it then goes to the assembly, or if it's approved in the Senate side of committee, then it goes to the Senate. And similar, again, this is where Wisconsin mirrors federal government. It has to pass, an identical version has to pass both the Assembly and the Senate. It then goes to the governor, and then the governor can either sign or veto it. If signed, then the state agencies now have to implement it, right? They have to do the rulemaking process. And sometimes during the rulemaking process, there's additional public comment from those experts and citizens and organizations for how they're going to implement it. They develop forms, right? They set up a new website. They update the state statutes. If there's funding attached to it, right? Funding has to be allocated and moved to those agencies. Guidance is then provided. And sometimes implementation can sometimes take months or even years. And so sometimes, you might see a bill move really quick through the legislature, depending on what it is. Maybe it's got a lot of bipartisan support, but it's something that is technical. It's something that, could transform the way, again, drinking fountains are implemented or upgraded. And so sometimes the implementation can take months or years. And so sometimes you'll see a bill pass, but then it'll say implementation is set to be done by, end of the year or middle of the next year, right? And so it gives agencies time. Sometimes though, there are laws that are passed where it's more of it might not have like a monetary item attached to it. That's where I like doing election law and administration. Sometimes there's money attached to it, but sometimes, if it's something as simple as like, hey, we want to lower the pre-registration voting age to 16. So if you're 16 or 17, you can pre-register to vote. And so then by the time you turn 18, you forgot you were pre-registered 2 years ago, but you're automatically registered to vote when you're 18 and you're good to go, right? So something like that. Again, maybe there could be some monetary stuff to it administratively. They've got to change the website or, update the forms, but sort of for the most part, right, it's not a huge mechanical thing. It's more of just an administrative thing. So it's a big process, right? But also where you can make a difference as a citizen, as a voter, right? Obviously, the first thing we do, we vote, get these folks in office, testify, email or call your state reps. You can meet with them. A lot of these folks, you can meet with in person or their staff, letters or comments. And of course, organizing and spreading the word is always such a powerful thing to do as well. I mean, especially at the local level, the state level where, it's a bit more black and white and, you could yell all day until you're purple in the face at some of these people, like you can't shame them for anything. You can still shame your school board members. You can still shame your city council members. And so as a recovering city council member myself, I was, sometimes I was mostly moved was when someone took their time to organize 20 people to show up and do handmade signs and, talk to us before the meeting and emailed us ahead of time and to show that, okay, wow, like, yes, this is a good representation of people who are for or against something. And so I would definitely say, of course, do it at the state level. There's power in numbers, but sort of it seems like the lower you go down in sort of the government that's closer to the people, they're a lot more responsive. Yes.
So it seems like some of this, and we're in kind of that time of year with the campaigns where they're trying to put out promises and say all the things they're going to do. What happens if the leadership in the legislature, even if it's of the same party, does not agree with what the governor wants to do? How does that push and pull work?
So that's a good question. So the question was, what sort of happens if the leadership in the legislature and the governor vary, or they're not on the same page maybe with something? Yeah, I mean, and that's again sort of the bully pulpit, right, that the governor has, is he or she has the veto power to not sign a bill into law. I think we saw this sometimes with Governor Walker, where the Republican-led legislature would put forward a bill, and Governor Walker at the time would maybe take a little while before he signed it, or he would sort of begrudgingly sign it, even though it came from his own party, because right, he didn't want to be he wanted to be a team player. I think where you see this most is usually the budget process here in Wisconsin. So we pass a biennium budget, so every 2 years. And our calendar year for our budget runs from like July 1st of a year and then goes for 2 years to like June 30th, 2 years from that. And so really, we vote for our legislative leaders in November, which is coming up. They get sworn into office in January. And right away, really, January is then the budget process has begun. And they have until July 1st to pass a budget. And a budget is usually, especially, I mean, no matter what happens, we're going to have a brand new governor, we're going to have a brand new speaker, and we're going to have a brand new majority leader. We can guess and hope who those 3 people are going to be. But right now there's 6 people in contention, right? You'll end up having 2 people for governor, and then 2 people from each political party for both houses. I mean, I think we've seen that even right now, right? Governor Evers tried passing sort of that budget deficit spending bill. But from everything I've read and seen, he didn't talk to his own party. He was only working with Republicans who apparently promised or overpromised that they could deliver their caucuses to vote for it. And so every Democrat voted against those, at least in the Senate. I think the Assembly, a few voted for it. But then enough Republicans, especially in the Senate, fell off, right? And then that didn't happen. And so I think that goes to show, even when your party's not in the majority, but you're trying to pass something, right, it's still good to talk to everybody involved. Especially right now, right? It's sort of the governor's a lame duck. We have this $2-3 billion plus surplus. People, both sides wanted to get a political win before November and before they left the legislature for the summer recess. And so it's hit or miss. I mean, right? I think we have that to consider. I mean, what does a Governor Crowley versus a Governor Hong look like, right? Perhaps the Democrats win their trifecta. Is Crowley going to be, maybe more reserved, or maybe will his attention be more like on local government because he's a local government guy, where Fran is, much more, healthcare is like a big thing of hers or whatever, right? And so because no matter who, this thing with our maps now, right, that are a bit more balanced is no matter who has the majority in either house, both of these parties are pretty big tent, right? I mean, on the Democratic side, you've got in the middle, right, sort of maybe those disaffected moderates who are pro-business, but they don't like all the, the culture war stuff, but they're going to vote for a Democrat, all the way right to socialists. And then the Republican Party is that same sort of disaffected person in the middle, but they can't pull themselves to vote for a Democrat, so they vote Republican, right, all the way to fascists, I don't know, right? So both parties are big tent parties, right? And we don't have this sort of European parliamentary style government, right? Each one of us is not 100% of anything, right? We're all on spectrums. And so no matter who the governor is, right, they're going to need something that is going to sort of, appeal to the moderates within that party, all the way to the liberals or conservatives. I will say quickly on sort of that idea and concept, one of our partners, Protect Democracy, and I'm also on the board of directors for the law firm Law Forward, which has won a lot of great battles these past several years, are suing the state to say that fusion voting is constitutional. And I won't bore you with the details, but essentially fusion voting allows other political parties to nominate the same candidate. So let's say, Francesca Hong is the nominee, the Democratic nominee. Well, you could also have the Working Family Party and the Democratic Socialist Party all endorse her. And so what happens is when you go to vote in November, you could vote for Francesca Hong either as a Democrat, as a socialist, or as a working family candidate. And then on election night, you take all those different political party votes for the same candidate and compile them together. And what it does is it shows the public and the candidate, the winning candidate or losing candidate, where their support comes from. And so some people are sort of interested in that as being an option here in Wisconsin. They do it in some other states, New Jersey, New York. It's a bit more prominent. But a lot of people think it would be really great because it would show, okay, Francesca Hong won the vote. She got 75% from Democrats, 20% from working family, and this much from the socialists. And then she can kind of say, okay, like these are my priorities. She can go with evidence to the legislature and say, I got this much support from this party, and universal child care is their top issue, right? And she can sort of go in strongly with that, or whoever the candidate or the governor is. So it's a good question. So briefly, just want to cover, again, sort of where you matter. A lot of ideas, are already sort of out there, right? There's other states doing things. Wisconsin wants to copy, what Michigan's doing or what Illinois is doing or another state. There's ideas out there by think tanks and policy groups. But, also every once in a while, laws come from just regular everyday people, right? Something happens and, we get the Amber Alert system, right? We get Marcia's Law. We get all these different laws and acts that come about because something may have happened. Sometimes it's tragic. And then you just have parents or concerned citizens who want to see something done. And right, so it all starts with an idea. And then usually then those groups organize, they try to find a sympathetic legislator, right? Then they draft the bill and then go through that whole process I talked about earlier. And then also, again, there's lots of ways to influence this process at every step. Again, obviously voting is the one that we all do and we should all do as often as possible. But again, right, contacting your legislators, testifying. Again, you don't have to be an expert to testify, right? You can also just do your homework, or maybe you have a unique experience or shared perspective on something. Anyone can testify to those. They usually take place in person in Madison. And then depending on which party's in charge or perhaps who the chair is, they usually also allow now for virtual testimony, right? So you can just jump on Zoom, you get in a queue, and then you can provide testimony virtually. So you can be anywhere in the country or state and still provide testimony. Submitting written comments, you can email the committee members your thoughts on a bill. Again, if you're for or against it. That's also a good indicator that helps the legislators maybe vote one way or the other. They can sort of say, well, I got 105 letters in support and only 2 against from my constituents. I can sort of see, I can vote this way and feel like I'm politically covered and also representing my constituents. Again, showing up, town halls, public hearings, organizing, spreading the word. I mean, all of us are probably on social media, right? X, Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook. And again, holding leaders accountable, calling people out when they're not doing their job. An example I will give is in my job so the Wisconsin Elections Commission, like I told you earlier, essentially oversees our elections statewide. It's a bipartisan commission, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. One of the commissioners, his name is Bob Spindell. He was a fake elector. In 2020, he was one of the fake electors who said that Trump had won Wisconsin and that I'm an elector, duly elected because Trump won Wisconsin. And we had an issue with that, and we called him out. We tried to have some accountability. He was appointed by the Senate Majority Leader, Devin LeMahieu, and obviously it didn't go that way. And then again, 2 years later in 2022, an email was leaked, and it showed Mr. Spindell in an email to other Republicans in Milwaukee County, because I think he might have been the chair or I think he was the chair of the congressional district, the 4th congressional district for the Republican Party, where he showed some data. This was the year that Mandela Barnes ran for U.S. Senate, lost by about 1%, and there was data or numbers suggesting that Black and brown turnout was actually down a little bit over past elections. And Mr. Spindell, an elections commissioner who's supposed to, with great integrity and great poise, is supposed to represent all of us, in this email said, we should be especially proud of the lower Black and brown turnout in Milwaukee County, and that's how we won this election. So someone who would openly brag about people of color not voting in as high of numbers, he's still on the commission to this day. He is there, our Wisconsin Elections Commission, so each political party gets to appoint 2 of the 3 members on either side, and then the governor gets to appoint 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, who are both former clerks. And then, so Tony Evers obviously is a Democrat. What he does is he'll take a name from the Republican Party to appoint, but it has to be a Republican, has to be a former clerk. And so it's an evenly split commission. Most of the time, a lot of their items are 5-1, 6-0, right? You're getting Republicans and Democrats to buy in. This past week, Elon Musk, the Wisconsin Elections Commission found in 2 instances where they believe Elon Musk broke election bribery law by giving away $1 million checks in Green Bay during the 2025 Supreme Court race. That finding to give to the Brown County District Attorney, Mr. David Lassay, the 2 referrals, it passed the commission 5-1. So you had 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans agreeing by what they saw with their eyes and with the evidence that Elon Musk, the only trillionaire in the world, tried to bribe Wisconsin voters. I will give you one guess who that one vote against for Elon Musk was, Mr. Spindell. So again, elections matter, political leadership matters, who are appointing to these commissions, because they have a lot of power and a lot of say. Kristen.
You're a former clerk. If you were appointed, would you accept that job?
So funny story. I was offered a spot on the commission, but because my day job is lobbying the Elections Commission, apparently my compliance counsel thought it would be conflict of interest to be lobbying myself. Our commissioners here in Wisconsin are very part-time. I think they get like a few $100s a month. The folks who are on there are either retired attorneys or they're still working. So it's not, I know in some states and at the federal level, commissioner jobs sometimes are full-time. You're a state employee, you've got benefits, you work 40+ hours a week. Obviously, our commission has been meeting a lot more frequently due to just the state of the world and the country. But no, it was an honor to be asked by the governor to serve. There was an opening on the board. It was during the whole Megan Wolf situation where the board split on firing Megan Wolf, who's the executive director of the commission, and the clerk appointee at the time for the Democrats had not been approved by the Senate. And so if y'all don't know this, with governor appointments, they're like a appointee commissioner or appointee secretary of agriculture until they're confirmed by the Senate. And so unfortunately with this current makeup of our Senate, they were sort of holding on to these positions and not confirming them, because if they didn't like what someone was doing, then the Republican Senate could essentially fire that appointee. And so the Democratic clerk appointee, who I think was actually the former clerk of Milwaukee, after they decided not to fire Megan Wolf, the Senate fired him. And they've done that several times. They did that to the Secretary of Agriculture, and I think in Evers' first term, Brad Paff, who's now a senator for La Crosse. So I was offered the position. I was asked to serve, but my wife didn't want to live off of $600 a month. So, and I have 4 kids. So, yeah. But no, I think it's a good idea in theory. Again, we're one of the few states that sort of have this model. I understand the pros and cons of it. I also see the pros and cons of having a Secretary of State have that much power, because depending on the party or just the person who's there, but at least with the Secretary of State, they're accountable to the people. They're elected. Our Wisconsin election commissioners are appointed by the political parties. And so someone like Mr. Spindell, who can say and do awful, horrible things, if the state Senate majority leader wants to keep him there, he stays there. There's no recall efforts. There's no way to, remove him from office like as a public member, except for, again, showing up, putting pressure, building campaigns, which we did. Yeah, sometimes, that's the bureaucracy of things, and you just got to keep working at it. And then quickly, I know I'm running out of time here, and I also want to leave some time for questions, but again, a lot of the different roles in state government, they should share the same goal, right, of serving the public. And so again, the citizens are really at the center of our democracy here in Wisconsin. We elect our legislators, we elect our governor. The state agencies are accountable to us through their appointment process, but also, right, we elect our county officials, our municipal clerks also work for us, our municipal officials, right, our mayors, our town, village managers. At the end of the day, it's really the citizenry who are in charge, and right, the power of the people, right, they give, right, we just got done with our 250th celebration of our country being independent, right, the power to govern is through the consent of the people, and so that model at the federal level is also very much true here in Wisconsin. Next slide. I think this might be the last one. So again, people often complain that government moves too slowly. Sometimes that's true, but if you ask yourself, would you rather lawmakers pass major laws overnight or carefully? Hopefully most of us would say carefully, but sometimes not too carefully. Right, so again, government includes all those things: hearings, transparency, checks and balances, God forbid the C word, compromise, court review. All these safeguards exist for a reason. They're designed to protect everyone, not just whoever happens to be in power for that day. And also, I'd say, remember, democracy doesn't end on election day. It continues through every phone call, every public meeting, every committee hearing, every email, every conversation with an elected official. And I do love that saying that, democracy doesn't end on election day. I'll just tell a quick story. I remember when I got elected to city council in Janesville in 2011, I had knocked off an incumbent who was there for a long time. And the chair of the UAW union came up and congratulated me, and he leaned in and whispered in my ear, he said, "The easy part's over." And I said, I didn't know what he was talking about. And then started to govern, and I said, "Oh, that's what Dave was talking about." Yeah, so you get to these boards, you get to these committees, these councils, and then also sort of with internally and these other structures and networks. I mean, I was only on a council of 7 people, but I was a seventh of the power, right? You have to build coalitions. You got to work with people that you normally might not work with. You've got to compromise. And just as we do that in our day-to-day lives, when interacting with our coworkers or our family or just people on the street, I think so too we expect that from our legislators and those who govern us. Next slide. This was just another case study. Again, just wanted to put it in there. So it was just sort of another scenario. I was trying to think of, not too crazy scenarios, but again, a case study for safer sidewalks, just breaking it through, like, who do you talk to? Well, it depends on who owns the road, right? If you're doing a crosswalk, does the municipality own it? Is it a county road? Is it a state highway, right? So it just, and I'm also happy to share these slides out with everyone afterwards if you'd like, or Kristen can get those out to folks. But again, this is, at the local level or the state level, crafting policy, crafting laws. It's not always sexy. It's not always, front page news, but being involved, being a part of the process, and I would say just staying engaged past election day is so important, because it's one thing to vote and then cross your fingers and hope things work out, but it's another thing to vote, watch them get sworn into office, and then hold them accountable and be a part of the dialogue going on. So next slide. I think this will be the last ones. So I'd just like to leave you with 6 questions to ask every candidate, regardless of party. Can this office actually do what you're promising? Do they need the legislature? Does it require funding? Could the courts become involved? How long would this realistically take? And who might oppose it? So I think those questions will help you separate slogans from governing. And finally, I would say democracy works best when citizens stay engaged. You don't have to run for office, although I would put in a plug, you should. You don't have to agree with everyone. You don't even have to be an expert, but staying informed, asking good questions, participating respectfully is how we build stronger communities. So the people who understand government are the people most likely to improve it. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you to Kristen and the board for their invitation. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or continue this conversation. Yes, sir.
Having lived in Waukesha for 30 years, I always had a sense that I voted a certain way, and I always lost. And then, but I guess I want you to, can you tell us a story of a legislator who maybe voted against his party because of the local outreach that you're at? Because what I feel happens, I mean, I've seen it at the school board level, because I've seen it at the city council, but I'm skeptical, but I'm open to being talked out of my skepticism about the ability for me as a more progressive Waukesha citizen to call my Republican legislator and have them say, oh, he made a really good argument. I'm gonna now go to my powerful chamber leader and say, I'm not voting with the other 18 members of the other 43 members against the bill that we've all agreed we're gonna vote a certain way.
Yeah.
Am I too cynical?
So the question is an example perhaps of when someone broke rank with their party because of outreach or because of like a grassroots engagement from their constituents. You know,
In the last 8 years or so. It's changed. You can probably tell stories of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and we all get happy.
Yeah.
But, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when both of those gentlemen were in power and I was in diapers, I mean, I'm sure, yeah, that was good stories. You know, it's one of those things where you wish it would happen more often. I will say, into the question about gerrymandering and maps, this current legislative session that we're in right now, probably in the last 2 decades, was one of the more or most civilized we've had in a while. The maps, I would maybe just sort of factually say, purged some of the extremists from the Republican Party from running for office, right? Your Janelle Branchens and those types of folks. That doesn't mean they're still not in the Capitol because Janelle works for a legislator. But, right, she's not in elected office anymore. And so I think when you have different things like fusion voting, when you have fairer maps, more representative maps, when you have more competitive legislative districts, right, that are more 50-50, or depending on sort of the wind, they could flip back and forth every 2 years. I think things like that promotes bipartisanship, it promotes independence, and folks that would be more responsive to their constituents, right? Until we had these new maps and before this Supreme Court, I think, rightfully ruled that the maps were unconstitutional, essentially you had one party doing whatever it wanted with no recourse for accountability. You could not shame them. You could not, right? You couldn't do anything. You know, maybe they lose a seat or two here, but of the 99 assembly seats, right, they've got 65. Oh, we can lose 5 seats. We've still got 60 or whatnot. And I would say this past session, there was a lot more bipartisan compromise. The tone of the legislators was much more reserved, right? It wasn't the sort of hyperbolic, not that it wasn't there, because, you know, there's certain issues, right, that people are incredibly passionate about, whatever that might be, but there's a lot more willingness to work together. And I will just say from personal experience, lobbying at the Capitol and working with the elections committee and the state assembly, you know, there was a time where, you know, for many weeks, I was calling and texting Republican legislators more than my wife to try to get bills passed that could hopefully get some Democratic support and ultimately get the governor to sign into law. And we did pass some bills. We passed the Electoral Count Reform Act bill, which brings Wisconsin into federal compliance. So in the future, when we get down to crunch time and people are filing lawsuits in a presidential year, Wisconsin will meet that deadline so that our electors are counted. There's been a few instances where whether Wisconsin's electors would be counted was in question, and now this bill, which passed unanimously and was signed by the governor, is a law. Another smaller thing that we passed in a bipartisan fashion, again, not super sexy, not front page news, but in a lot of our townships, the municipal clerk, and I'll say she because most clerks are 90-some% are female, are women, are elected. Our town clerks most of them are elected every 2 or 4 years, nonpartisan basis. Well, a lot of these town clerks have been there 20, 30, 40 years. They retire, and then no one wants to be the clerk. No one knows how anything works in town hall. And so we passed a law that gave townships the ability to change from an elected clerk to an appointed, professionally appointed clerk much faster. It's normally like a 6-month to year process. That's a long time for a town to go without a clerk. We sort of streamlined that down to a few months. And so that's now out there. And so now towns can, when they lose that longtime clerk, they can maybe look to hiring a professional person to come in. And then also they don't have to be a resident of that town. And again, bipartisan things, not front page news, but I think things that under the former gerrymandered republic, they probably wouldn't have even taken up those bills. And there's actually another bill that we were trying to pass that was actually going to set a new sort of floor for how many hours of in-person absentee voting had to be required. Right now under state law, early voting clerks have to offer it, but that's where it stops. It doesn't say how many hours, it doesn't say where, it doesn't say you have to do like a public notice. Well, you do have to do public notice, but again, so this bill would have required all municipalities to offer at least 20 hours publicly noticed. Unfortunately, it got pushed back in the Senate, so that the Senate was much closer for members. And don't know if most of y'all know this, but the Republicans, like at the federal level, at the state level, sort of have like we won't vote on a bill unless there's a majority of the majority to pass the bill, right? So if 33, so what is that, 7? So if 17 Republicans don't agree to a bill, we're not going to vote for it. Well, there's only 18 of them, so it only takes 2 to kill the party, which is what happened. So that happens a lot too, even when the same parties control both houses. We've quickly learned Voss and LeMahieu also do not like each other. No one likes each other up there, apparently, even of the same parties. But again, we're all people. It's a very human process. But I think after this election, I think we'll see, I think hopefully even a more sort of civil, I think a lot of people suspect Democrats will maybe win the Senate back. There's a higher chance of that than the Assembly. And even if the Republicans maintain control of the Assembly, the majority is going to be incredibly slim, which is going to, it's going to make, a few small hand of moderate Republicans, 1 or 2 of them, very powerful people, because they'll be able to side with the Democrats who probably have the Senate and, whoever has the governor's mansion. So again, that checks and balances. I'm optimistic. I'm usually a very pessimistic person. So you guys have caught me on a good night. Yes, sir.
I've heard that there have been some great ideas that came from the legislature and bill reform, but they wouldn't even get a hearing. So, and that's because I think the person who's in but does he have all of that control because he controls campaign funds? Or is that like a structural problem? How do you have a legislative body with 99 people in it? It comes, like you say, when the majority is so huge, then does that really make the speaker so powerful?
Yeah.
That he doesn't, that democracy doesn't work.
So the question is, does the folks who are supposed to be hearing testimony through public hearings, bills aren't being heard because of the speaker and his power, whether that comes through potentially, campaign support, the controlling sort of the mechanisms there, or sort of through the party power. I'd say it's a little bit of all of that, right? I mean, everything up there is political, right? They're always worrying about the next election or re-election, how this, scores. It's interesting too, like when the legislature, and I've seen this, and I know Kristen probably has in her day job too, really like after an election, when they're working on the budget, and they have to pass it's state law, they have to pass a budget by July 1st. Really those first 3, 4, 5, 6 months are the honeymoon phase, because the budget is not just monetary things, right? You can also put things in there that are bills, and through the process, normally the governor introduces their own bill, and the legislature can decide to take it and play with it, or they can also just throw it out altogether and make their own, which has usually been the process these past 8 years. But it's a little bit of both. I'll say, for example, too, like in the legislature. So a lot of the work I did this session was in the assembly. I worked with the committee for elections and campaigns in the assembly, Republican majority, Democratic minority. In the Senate, for the first time in like 20 years, they didn't even constitute or reconstitute an elections committee. So when bills would pass the assembly that were election related, we had to play whack-a-mole on what committee in the Senate was going to see it. Is it going to be federal relations? Is it going to be tax and reform? And it was interesting because the Senate majority leader, depending on whether or not he supported a bill, he would send it to a committee with a chairman or chairperson who he thought he could get it through. And then if he didn't like you or didn't like that bill, he'd send it to this committee with, a heavy-handed chairperson. Also, something I would say, and it's not as publicly known, right? Because folks don't always follow me with the legislatures closely, but we still have a gerrymander within the legislature with the current leadership. So the Democrats have, the Republicans have 18 Senate seats. The Republicans have 18, Democrats have 15. That's pretty close. You think that the makeup of committees would be close to that, but Republicans maybe have a seat or two more. So, and also in the assembly, right? Democrats have 45, Republicans have the other, 50 some or whatever, 54 seats. Again, it's not 50-50, but it's close. The elections and campaign committee in the assembly, where Republicans have 54, Democrats have 45 seats. The makeup of the committee was 7 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And the Senate, it looked the same. And so there's a lot of power with the speaker and the majority leader because they can decide the makeup of the committees. Where in Congress, in the federal Congress, it's much more on par, right? We have, Senator Lindsey Graham just passed away, and he was on like the Judiciary Committee, and I think it's like 21 senators, and 11 Republicans and 10 are Democrats, right? And so it's going to be a 10-10 split, right, until his sister, takes a seat and comes. So at least at the federal level, there's a bit more equalness to that. But so we've sort of seen this now as, since we have newer maps and the gerrymander is not as bad as it was, they're still doing it through the levers of power, where they're just overstacking these seats so that even if 1 or 2 of their members decide to defect, it's not enough to change that. So that's something I'm hoping that whoever the next 2 leaders is they'll have some sort of formula to break down. And then when it comes to like the Joint Finance Committee, which is the committee that is probably the most powerful, it's a makeup of both assembly members and senators. This past session, it was like, 18 Republicans and 4 Democrats, so hopefully we can undo that gerrymander in the future with new leadership. Y'all depressed enough now, or should I?
I'm sure Jim has something really hilarious to talk about.
I mean, the Supreme Court, and yeah.
It'll just be an affirmation of everything you said.
Thank you again so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Appreciate it.
Proof that, and Aaron, next slide. proof that everything that Sam just told you is true and accurate. Just a few examples of that. And one of them just from the past week or so. This is from a year ago. Remember this contest between the legislature and the attorney general about who has civil settlement authority? And the question was whether or not the attorney general in civil cases could settle these without getting authority of the legislature. Supreme Court comes in, as Sam was indicating, and said, yeah, there's some limited shared areas, but again, Brian Hagedorn writes for majority, says that the legislature has failed to prove its case that it should in fact be involved in that. And so again, a decision by the courts that addresses this tension between the legislature and at least the attorney general. Next slide, Aaron. This was just last week. Rebecca Dallett issues a similar opinion, July 10th of 2026. This has to do with where the monies can be allocated within the general fund. And the Supreme Court says, yeah, that the Attorney General does have the authority to designate some of those funds gotten through those civil dispositions into one of our program appropriations without undermining what the legislature can do. And so again, just a couple of examples of what Sam was describing. And finally, exactly what Sam was describing. Next slide, Aaron. This is that history that Sam was talking about. December of 2023, maps are found unconstitutional, non-contiguous. There are some other issues with them. Governor signs into law the new maps in February, and we have an election in November of 2024, and again, obviously in 2026 as well. So just some very practical invocations of everything that Sam taught us tonight and affirmed for us tonight when it comes to, again, also the involvement of the courts in disputing and resolving some of these disputes among the parties. Final slide, Aaron, and that is that we're meeting again on the 6th and the 13th. We're going to talk about the media a lot, going to revisit some First Amendment issues, and then also much consistent with what Sam was describing tonight, representation in Congress, including challenges to that, redistricting, accountability concepts, and yes, indeed, we'll talk about that Calais case coming out of the Supreme Court that changes not only the Voting Rights Act and basically drop kicks Section 2, but now permits congressional reline drawing around the country, including a number of states, not just in the South, redrawing lines based upon, again, principally political animation, but also without any consideration of racial issues out there. So we'll talk about all of that coming up again the 6th and the 13th. And I think for purposes of recording, that concludes our program tonight. Very good.